So we've all become accustomed to education being understood as the solution for everything that ails us. When there's a social, political, economic problem, we need to educate the people who are causing it, or educate the people who are the potential saviors who will rescue us from the problem. But we very rarely get the chance to explore in depth the relationship between education and the political and social problems that we encounter, which is why I'm so excited about this conference as a whole, and particularly about this panel today. Many of us feel that we are in a moment of political crisis, and we've heard many calls for more and better civic education as a way to ameliorate it. But what we don't typically hear in media conversations is how you do it well and what we could actually expect from it. The technique of civic education and the way in which it might produce something like a robust democratic citizenship is typically not broadly shared with the many people who would be interested in such processes and outcomes. And so that's what we're going to be talking about today, and we're going to be talking about it with three people who are especially well positioned in different positions to talk about it with us. So first we have Meg Heubeck, and Meg currently works for the UVA Center for Politics, and she develops curricula for the Youth Leadership Initiative as well as the Global Perspectives on Democracy. And she's worked in the field of education for 25 years as a classroom teacher, instructional leader, and instructional designer. She's also worked on projects such as the Jamestown 2007 Federal Commemoration, which developed and edited teacher resources, as well as several international visitor programs for the U.S. Department of State. So in other words, she has a long history in the intersection between politics and education, and really in the hands-on work of designing these curricula. Dean Diana Hess is the Dean of the School of Education at the University of Wisconsin-Madison, as well as the Karen A. Falk Distinguished Chair of Education. And she was, previous to that, the Senior Vice President of the Spencer Foundation. And Dean Hess's work centrally concerns the same question, but from the perspective of research. So she conducts robust empirical studies of what happens when students discuss controversial issues in the classroom, what happens when teachers are intentional about organizing deliberation about the issues that many of us avoid in the rest of our lives, and what allows it to go well, what undermines it. So her recent book, The Political Classroom, Evidence in Ethics and Democratic Education, which was co-authored with Paula McAvoy, won the American Educational Research Association's Outstanding Book Award in 2006, as well as the very prestigious Gramer Award in 2017. And last but most certainly not least, John Hunter. John Hunter is a native Virginian. He's the graduate of Virginia Commonwealth University, and most well known for being the founder and executive director of the World Peace Games Foundation. Hunter is an award-winning gifted education teacher and educational consultant who has dedicated his life to helping children realize their full potential. Now, I won't say much about him now because he's going to be discussing his work in his presentation, but John is known internationally as being an innovative designer of curricula that engage students in thinking about the kinds of complex issues that we typically assume children just can't handle, aren't ready for psychologically, emotionally, intellectually. So I'm very excited to introduce these three panelists, and we will begin with Meg.
So thank you so much for having me. My two panelists, I'm so humbled to be here with them. John is a real rock star, as probably those of you who live in town know, so it's really my pleasure to be up here talking about civic engagement. Over the past 2 days, I've been kind of depressed, not because I was coming here, but because of stories that I keep reading. So I am originally from Baltimore, where I taught school for 12 years, and at a school not far from where I grew up, apparently there was a vocabulary day. And the students were to wear shirts with a letter on them. And then throughout the day, they were going to make up words. Stand together. It's a really great idea. Unfortunately, a bunch of students decided to stand together and spell out a very inappropriate racist term. And then, because they're students, they took a picture of it and put it on social media. That concerns me. At a school not far from where I live now, an African-American football player was called the N-word during a football game, and the team was not immediately reprimanded. In fact, it has yet to be even discussed. I think Ben Franklin said it best when he said that when they asked him what they had created in Philadelphia, he said, a republic, if you can keep it. And I think that if you can keep it is what civic education is all about and why it is so important today. If there wasn't a time where it was more important, I don't know what it is. I don't know when it is. So the Youth Leadership Initiative at the UVA Center for Politics seeks to increase civic engagement by providing teachers and educators with great, engaging, authentic, rigorous teacher-designed lesson plans that will empower students throughout a lifetime of civic engagement. I'm the only educator at the Center for Politics, so it's really nice today to be here among my peers, as opposed to sometimes being all around politicians who don't quite understand what it is I do or why it's so important. But before I kind of show you what I do, I'm all about action, so I need you to stand up. And I know you're all teachers, so I know you all do this with me. So there are 3 skills that are integral to your lifetime as a citizen. One is discourse. 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 Very good. The second is debate. Debate. And the third, and most important, I feel, is compromise. Compromise. So now we're going to say all 3 of those words together, and you're going to fist pump, because that shows this is a sign of power, right? So we're empowering for those 3 skills. So on 3, everybody ready? 1, 2, 3. Discourse, debate, compromise. Discourse, debate, compromise. You can sit down now. That's something I do a lot of chanting, and partially because I think I want to get those 3 words into the heads of students that I work with or teachers that I'm working with. That those are the 3 skills that we are really trying to impart to teachers at the Youth Leadership Initiative. I've been watching House of Cards. In fact, I binge watched. It's the first show I ever binge watched. It's very depressing. And so what I'm trying to do is give hope to our communities across the nation. We have 70,000 teachers that are registered with our site, to really make a difference, to be able to, to look at media and be able to evaluate it effectively. Media bias. We're trying also to give power to groups that have typically been disenfranchised or not included in the conversation. I don't even need to talk about this, because millennials, everyone's going to roll their eyes. I love millennials. Yes, I do. I love you. The reason why they're not engaged politically, and there's a book by Jennifer Lawless, it's called Running from Office, okay? It's a great book. She did a lot of research on why young people are not running for office. We're gonna have a problem if people don't step up to the table. And so I thought about what she was writing and what I am doing. Probably the biggest reason is polarization, and I will give this screen to you. The Virginia Political Action Program, VPAP.org, made a map that showed just in Virginia, between 2012 and 2016, how polarized the state is. And I would imagine, I can extrapolate from that, that's also the case throughout the country. So students are seeing, or millennials, young people are seeing a lot of people yelling and screaming, Jerry Springer style. Do anybody remember Jerry Springer? Jerry Springer style politics. They have very little civic education in the public schools at this point. STEM is being emphasized over social studies, over civics, and we need to have civics all year, every year. All year, every year. Gerrymandering is another reason, and so YLI, the Youth Leadership Initiative, we have made lesson plans on all of these topics to help students and teachers and parents to understand how to discuss politics civilly. Civilly. That is my whole life's ambition, to do civilly. Okay. Oh, I'm sorry, I'm supposed to do it myself. Oh, I've done it wrong. Okay. You can read, but, so I won't read this to you. I hate when people do that to me. So all of our materials are free. Registration is free. It's free and easy, okay? But this was a quote from the Southern Poverty Law Center that I came across in, I think, January of last year. And it was a survey of 10,000 school teachers. They are afraid schools are not allowing, some schools are not allowing political discourse in the classroom. That should scare everyone to death. And it is up to everybody sitting in this room to do something about it. Because if we can't talk civilly in classrooms and we can't talk about politics, then why do we have schools? Because our schools were not created to help people get jobs. They were created to help build citizens. So we need to kind of remember, go back in our history. Of course, if you haven't had history education, it's going to be hard. So that's kind of what we have to do. So here is an example. I had about 50 students from across the Charlottesville area at Piedmont Virginia Community College, and we have a Talking Turkey program that teaches students, parents, and communities how to talk civilly with one another. And so this was a comment about why it would be after the end. This is my exit slip, my assessment, why it would be important. What important skill did you learn by participating in Talking Turkey? So, to talk so that I can understand other people's points of view. So Talking Turkey, it's called Talking Turkey, taking the dis out of civil discourse. Now, I'm 48, and I'm slowly losing my hip factor. So you have to reward me for the fact that I named it something clever. So it's a series of materials that download free from our website. And what I've really been advocating with teachers is, before the school year starts, thinking about how you're setting your classroom up, thinking about what structures you can put in place to promote civil discourse. A lot of students, I had a high school intern last summer who polled 500 students, high school students from across the state of Virginia. And most of them said they do talk politics in the classroom. However, it's usually one-sided. The side of the teacher. And if you don't agree with the teacher, you tend to keep your mouth shut. Of course, makes sense. So what I am trying to do, what the Youth Leadership Initiative is trying to do, is to get students to be able to discuss, use, and understanding that everybody's point of view is valid. Because a lot of what we're seeing, a lot of those incidents I described earlier, are a result of us not having tough discussions with one another about race, about religion, about all kinds of things. So we have to educate the young people to reinvent civil discourse. It has to start with young people. I hate to say it, but it's too late for my people. I don't know. Okay. Some of the things we have on our website that really help us We have over 100 downloadable lesson plans. Talking Turkey is some of those. But we also have a lot of other great things on our website. We have a political ideology survey, which is online. So students can go onto our website, there's a students page, and they can take a political ideology survey that tells them where they fall on the political spectrum and matches them with legislators who currently have that political disposition. It's getting harder and harder for us to find moderates. That's the problem. Also, one of the things I will say is because we have very little funding, partnerships have really helped us to expand our reach and be able to reach out to communities. So particularly the League of Women Voters is our boots on the ground. They really do a lot to promote YLI and voter registration in high schools. The Civics Renewal Network is an organization in Washington, D.C. that has pulled together all of the people working in civics ed so that we're not reinventing the wheel. So all of us have a specific niche in the civic ed community. And then I do presentations, so I'm available if you would like me to come and speak at any of your events. But for the Close Up Foundation, I go and do workshops with teachers when they have their programs. And I'm going to end it with that, but I want to say something. I have hope. I do. It's hard sometimes to have hope, but I do because I see it in the young people I work with, and I see it with the international guests that come to this country and are continually amazed by our democracy, by our freedoms. And I'm not going to let anything destroy that. And so what I'm trying to do is empower all of you to empower your students, and then they'll empower their parents so we can have this chain reaction of reinventing our democracy. Thank you so much.
Good morning. It's great to be here. I really want to thank the organizers of this conference. It's really a fantastic and diverse group. I mean, one of the things I worry about in civic education is we are often very siloed, and very often there are meetings for people who do school-based work, and there are meetings for people who do after-school-based work, and those people don't come together enough. And so I'm very glad that we have all these different parts of the civic ed community in the room. I also want to call out the previous panel. That was just fantastic. I've learned so much. I took so many notes, and I am just really thrilled that that was how we started the day. So it's great to be here. So again, my name is Diana Hess, and I come from the University of Wisconsin-Madison. Before I went to Madison, I was a high school social studies teacher outside of Chicago. I was also president of the Teachers Union, which is where I learned a lot about practical politics. And after a number of years of teaching, I went to work for a group called the Constitutional Rights Foundation Chicago, which is a national civic education group that did a lot of work in the Chicago public schools and a lot of work with young people and police officers. So I was really intrigued to hear the work that is going on with young people and police officers. I think that's really important work. It's got a long history, although I think what's going on now is a lot better than what we did so many years ago. And after being at the Constitutional Rights Foundation, I decided that I thought there was a role for research that wasn't being played in the civic education community. So apropos to the question this morning about research, I was really interested in what could we do with research, and research in the right way that might improve the quality of the experiences that young people were receiving in schools. So I went to the University of Washington to start doing research, and in 1997 and continuing until just a couple years ago, I've been primarily focused on one question, which is, what do young people learn in classes where teachers are emphasizing highly controversial, authentic, and contemporary political issues? And when young people are talking about those issues in class, what difference does it make, both to what they think about what they're learning, what they think about politics. But then I became very interested a number of years ago in what difference it makes long term. We often talk about not understanding the effects of schooling until we get way beyond schooling. And I'm sure that's the case for all of you, that you can think back to something from 5 or 10 or 15 years ago that had a huge effect on you, but you probably didn't recognize it at the time. So in the most recent work I've been doing, longitudinally, we looked at students 2 and 4 years out after high school, which is not long enough for sure, but it certainly gave us some ability to make some judgments about what was happening in classes that had an effect on young people over time. And all of that work has caused me to think 3 things that I want to talk about today. The first is that the role of schools cannot be underestimated, nor can we expect schools to save what is a fundamentally very challenging political climate. And so first I want to talk about why schools are important and what we might want to do differently to make sure that we really take advantage of the ways they can be important. Then I want to talk about what I'm starting to think of as political climate change. So we read a lot about climate change, environmental climate change. I actually think we're in a period of extreme political climate change that is in many ways as potentially damaging to our future as environmental climate change is. So I want to talk about what I see changing in the political climate and as a consequence what we need to do differently in schools. The third thing I want to talk about very briefly is what are the kind of tensions or paradoxes or conundrums that we need to confront regardless of whether or not we're doing this work in schools or in community settings. So let's talk first about why schools are important. And Meg, everything you said, I just want to say ditto, and I'm going to say less than I had planned because of what you said. But the thing that I want to emphasize the most is that the mission of schools should be to improve the quality of our democracy. That should be the mission of schools. If we were going to assess how well a particular school is doing, how well a particular school district is doing, how well a particular state is doing, how well the nation as a whole is doing, I would argue that the best and most authentic assessment would be what role is that school, district, or system playing in improving the quality of the democracy. And in a time where I think the very likelihood that we will continue to have a democracy is less of a sure thing than I believed it would have been 5 or 10 or 20 years ago, I would argue that it's not just improving the quality of a democracy, but it's making sure that we don't lose the democracy that we have. So that should be the mission of schools. It's not the only mission of schools. We want students to learn all sorts of things in schools, and I would argue that we have extremely high standards for what we want schools to do. We want schools to teach young people math. We want schools to teach young people how to read and how to write, how to get along with people. We want schools to teach young people how to be healthier. We want schools to prepare young people for work. I think our expectations for what we want schools to do with respect to democracy, unfortunately, are too low. So the first thing I want to say is that the mission of schools should be to improve the quality of democracy, and that schools can really do a bad job at that, or they can really do a good job at that. And in my work, I've had the pleasure of being in schools all over the place where I watch teachers who are doing an extraordinarily good job of teaching young people how to improve the quality of democracy. And by doing that work, I've realized that schools have 4 key assets that we need to take advantage of. One is, the very simple one, is that that's where young people are. Now, young people are not only in schools. Young people are working in these fabulous organizations that many of you have created and have dedicated so many years to, and that's a wonderful thing. But at the end of the day, if we want to reach all young people, if we want to really care about equity, then we can't ignore schools, because the one place that almost all young people are is in school. And so that is just a fundamental reality that we can't ignore. The second thing is that young people are in schools where there are teachers who either already are or could be well prepared to do the kind of high quality civic education work that we know from practice and from research really makes a difference. This is not really a big mystery. When people say, well, we really don't know what schools should do, that's actually not true. We know a lot about what schools should do, and we know a lot about what schools should do going back decades and decades. In the room we have Dr. Judith Torney-Purta, who started doing research on what schools should do more than 40 years ago. That research has stood the test of time. We've got Dr. Jeremy Stoddard, who's doing research now on new approaches to using technology and gaming to help young people learn about the political system. So we are learning a lot about what schools should do. Teachers can learn that. And the role of teachers is really critical. And we shouldn't ever think that that's not the case, that there's no such thing as a teacher-proof way of educating people. And it's insulting when people say that. It's as if teachers are the problem instead of people who could be such a great asset and such a great help to this whole mission. The next thing is that in many schools, not all, we have courses in which we can fit high-quality civic education. Now, Meg mentioned that we probably don't have the attention to this that we need. But still, in almost all school districts, there are some set of courses that are pretty ideal sites for high-quality civic education, and they're not all social studies. Some of the best civic education I'm seeing is being done in art, and is being done in English language arts and literacy classes. It's not the case that social studies is not a good place. It's in some ways an excellent place, but it's not the only place. I'm talking to a lot of science teachers who are doing high quality civic education because they couldn't be teaching the new national voluntary standards, the Generation Next science standards, which are fabulous, by the way. They couldn't teach those without doing civic education. It's part of how those standards are constructed. And finally, last but not least, there's a lot of high quality curriculum that has been developed and tested very, very rigorously. And that curriculum isn't one-size-fits-all civics. That curriculum actually is incredibly variegated. And so we have a lot of assets in schools that we should take advantage of. That being said, the political climate is changing in ways that make it harder for schools to do this work. It is much harder to be a really good civic educator in a school today than it would have been 5 years ago, 10 years ago, or 15 years ago. And there's about 3 reasons for that. One is that political polarization and its kind of evil twin, rising economic inequality, those 2 phenomena, in the way that they're working together, have really messed up our ability to use schools as the kind of civic education asset that we should be able to count on. One reason is that we have so many people who are living in ideologically homogenous communities. So we have this sociological phenomenon in the United States where people are moving to live next to people who have political views that are identical to their own. And so in our everyday discourse, we are much less likely to be exposed to people who have different views. And the problem with that is that if we're not exposed to people who have different views, we're much more likely to think that people who have different views are not just not to be trusted, but they're to be loathed. And so political polarization, economic inequality have caused 2 things that I think should concern us a lot. One is a lack of trust. As a general rule, we have less trust in a lot of things, and in some cases that's good. We don't want to be blindly trusting things we shouldn't trust. But if we don't trust anything, especially if we don't trust one another, to work together, to be people who, even if they have different opinions, are people who deserve our respect, we're really not going to get very far. So that's a problem that I'm really concerned about. That's part of what I consider the political climate change. I think the other thing that's happening is that we are becoming too accepting of gross inequality, especially in schools. There's not a state in this country that you could go into where you could proudly say, we've come up with a way to make sure that all young people are offered equal educational opportunities. And that, unfortunately, has also bled into civics. The one place where you would think in the schools we would most care about equity is preparing people to participate in democracy that by definition has to be concerned about equity. But that's not what we're seeing. What we're seeing is that in schools with a lot of money, students are being exposed to really high quality civic education, and that looks very different than in schools that don't have those kind of financial resources. So one thing that we need to do differently now because of political climate change is we've got to really focus on equity. And to really focus on equity, I would want to challenge my great friends here at UVA, this amazing public institution, and my great friends at my own institution, University of Wisconsin-Madison, which I think is another amazing public institution. When we ask kids questions like, how many honors classes have you had? That causes schools to say, let's separate kids, because we're not going to give everyone honors classes. And so some kids are going to get those, and some kids are not going to get those. And I'm very concerned that when we do that in the civic education sphere, what we're doing is robbing schools of the opportunity to keep students together working on the kind of public problems that they care about. So one of the concerns I have is that even though the political climate is more polarized, people are more likely to live close to people that they already agree with, we see that in schools too. We're seeing red schools and blue schools, and then further within those schools, we're segregating students by race and by class and by ethnicity and by religion. And when we do that, we lose the very deliberative asset that schools give us. So I think we really need to think carefully about what we in higher ed are doing that actually may be making things much more challenging than they need to be. Finally, let me end with this. I think there are some very interesting opportunities that we need to take advantage of in the next couple of years. One is that as the political climate changes, we need to make sure we're actually teaching about it. So, for example, in schools, I would argue that we should be learning about political polarization, what it is, what causes it, what has been done in other societies over time to mitigate its effects. We need to really understand that. In a similar fashion, we throw around the word democracy all the time. But actually, democracy as a political concept is extremely challenging, is something that most people don't understand very well. And I think we need to make sure that we're taking seriously the fact that if we want people to work on sustaining and improving something, that we've got to make sure that we're teaching about it in a very serious way. The good news is I can point to teachers all over this country who are doing this now. So it's not like we don't have fabulous examples of what good looks like. And I want to call out the teacher education students here at UVA. Yesterday when I spoke to them, I asked them what they were learning, and what they're learning is exactly what I've learned from my research we know makes a difference. So thank you very much for that hard work, and thank you for being here today.
Good morning.
Morning.
I am a small-town school teacher. I started in Richmond, Virginia in the 1970s. And the work that I'm going to share with you today, the only reason it's successful is because I had excellent teachers. And everything I do is something I owe to them. So I'm literally, as we say, standing on their shoulders today. There's no way I would be here otherwise. I'll try to make my remarks within the time limit. I know the timekeeper's going to be waving that 0 minutes card at me pretty soon. but I'll try to stick within that. What I'd like to do is share with you what this work is that I do as a school teacher. And of course, as a teacher, I brought my audiovisual aid. I have a 3-minute video clip for you. And following that, I'd like to talk about what the 3 flowers, I guess you could say, to use a biology analogy, 3 flowers that come from this work regarding civics, and the 1 main fruit that comes from this work. So hopefully that'll be within our time frame. But I'll start off by saying that this exposure to the World Peace Game simulation, geopolitical simulation, which is now in 31 countries and the film has been screened at the United Nations, the Pentagon, and State Department, other various heads of states have seen it and so forth. That would not have been possible in my small town of Charlottesville had it not been for a University of Virginia alum, Chris Farina, an independent filmmaker. Independent means he has no money. And so he had to really work very hard. And Chris screened his latest film last night, which is also about another University of Virginia professor, and that's Andy Kaufman, who's here in the room today, seats at the table, the Books Behind Bars program. So I just want to call out Andy and let him be appreciated and recognized. Andy, thank you for that. In 1978, I was a beginning teacher in Richmond, Virginia, public schools. I had no idea what to do. I had just gotten hired, and I asked my supervisor, what should I do? And she frustrated me. She upset me. She disturbed me. She refused to tell me what to do. She kept saying, what do you want to do? At the time, I didn't realize I was being given the greatest gift a teacher could ever have, the empty space to create, to find out what it was in me that needed to come out to be a teacher. So I created this thing called the World Peace Game. It was based upon what my students loved. Because I learned from my undergraduate mentor, Miss Ethel J. Banks, who was in her 70s when I met her, an African-American teacher, teaching at West Hampton School in Richmond, Virginia, still teaching in her 70s, emotionally disturbed preschool children. She dressed to the nines every day, pearls, a suit, jewelry, high heels. And she could hardly move because she had arthritis so bad in her feet. But she would simply stand at her desk and raise her hand, and she would teach with this magical power. You've seen teachers, you know teachers who have that, with just a look they can bring you around. But she would do that every day. And I said, Miss Banks, how do I become a teacher like that? And she'd say, Hunter, she shocked me. She said, don't worry about curriculum. But Miss Banks, I've got to. That's what it's all about. She said, no, Hunter. She said, first thing you need to do is learn who your students are, what they care about, what they love, and then build curriculum around and to what they care about, who they are. And their love will drive the learning. This was a cardinal lesson for me. I had no idea how important it would be. So I followed her advice and I invented this World Peace Game. It's a mashup of social studies, African history we had to look at. I had to look at, I think problem solving had just come into vogue, so I put that in. And then I knew the students loved board games. 1978, we didn't have anything else. No social media, nothing. The desert. So we used board games. And they loved it. It evolved over the years so that in 2006, Chris Farina came into my classroom and said, I'd like to make a movie about this. I'm an independent filmmaker. I got so excited, I thought we were going to Hollywood. He says, independent filmmaker means I have no money. So that means we're going to be showing it to some friends on a screen in my living room wall. Chris had no idea of his own talent. He could make a rock look glamorous. But the film basically depicts the geopolitical simulation. I'll describe it briefly and then show you the 3-minute clip. Picture's worth 1,000 words. It's 4 plexiglass layers of glass. They're arranged vertically, emulating the Earth, under sea level, ground and sea level, aircraft level, outer space level. There's thousands of game pieces representing different aspects of the Earth and the civilizations on it. Children are divided into different country teams. We have 4 agencies, United Nations, a World Bank, arms dealers, and a World Court. There's also a weather goddess who controls random events, random weather, random stock market. We even have a saboteur. One child, usually it's a child who's always in trouble. I asked that child to secretly try to destroy the game. Nobody knows who it is. We know the person's in the room. So we put them in this crucible of situations. It's everything from ethnic, religious, and minority strifes and issues. We have water rights issues. We have poverty versus wealth, breakaway republics, famine, poverty, pollution, climate change, ethnic cleansing. You name it, we have it in the game. We put 9-year-olds now into this crucible, 9 and 10-year-olds, and for 40 years, next year will be 40 years, they have always solved all 50 of these interlocking global problems and raised every country's asset value so that everyone wins. And I don't have to teach it, I don't have to preach it. The empty structure of the game, which allows them to be completely human, allows them to find their own way and make solutions that I as a teacher could not conceive of. They read Sun Tzu's The Art of War to get a deeper understanding of how to avoid these conflicts. That's what The Art of War is about, how to get out of war or avoid it if you can. 9-year-olds can handle this philosophically. We put them in and we have trust and faith in our relationship with them that they can actually solve the problem, because in a few years they will have to. And I always start every world peace game with an apology. Boys and girls, I'm so sorry. We have to do this. My generation, generations before, have just messed up things so badly that you're really going to actually have to do this very soon. I'm sorry, and I apologize we put you in this position. This is Chris Farina's World Peace and Other Fourth Grade Achievements, a 3-minute clip. We'll show that now, and then I'll come back and explain the 3 flowers and the 1 fruit that comes from this in civic education. You'll need volume. Relationships are important in education. That really maybe even the key to teaching well is the relationship you have with the student. If you're able to touch their mind, fine, but if you can touch their heart, then the mind contact lasts longer and goes deeper, I think. Talking. How about that? As you can see, it's out of sync. Yeah, you can cut the volume and I can keep talking. You can run it as a nice visual in the background if you like, or not. Okay. So I'll just explain. I apologize about the out of syncness. Sometimes technology fails us. We should go back to board games, a little easier. So I'll just say that the things that come out of this experience, number one, before I ever approach the classroom, the very first thing, and again, I don't have a prescription of how things should be done. The very first thing I do is self-introspection. I look into who I am before I even approach the children, because I have subtle biases, prejudices, all kinds of things that can hinder the learning in my classroom, and I don't even know that I have them unless I examine myself relentlessly every day in a self-introspection inventory. Secondly, as I spoke earlier about the passions of children have to be recognized and honored. If you're teaching to them as if they were one monolithic block and you don't know or care who they are, the learning will not have the impact you wish for. So by having a relationship, finding out what they care about. I had a 6th grader, only loved skateboarding, ready to drop out of school at the first opportunity. I had to teach geometry. We couldn't connect. But then I found out about his passion. I started to talk about building that skate park he was interested in, if we could figure out the geometry of the half pipe and of the ramps he needed. Geometry, circumference, half pipes, tell me about that so I can build a better skate park. Soon he became so involved in mathematics, it was incredible. So passion would be the second thing. And the third thing, the third flower, is going to be what we call collective wisdom. The World Peace game, they're allowed to do and be anything human they want to. The game is the teacher. I don't have to teach or preach anything. They learn through the experience viscerally. Problem-based learning, inquiry-based learning you've heard about, is simply allowing them to design the curriculum live in the moment, real time. And their collective wisdom solves the problems. Why should I, with my 1954 Apple IIe or Commodore computer mind, think that I should make all the decisions in a classroom in the 21st century when I've got a network of 21st century supercomputers sitting in front of me? Why don't I network and ask them to be collaborators and co-teachers with me and help even design my curriculum with me, their passion driving it? So those three things, and then finally there's the fruit, compassion. I don't have to teach this. Every World Peace Game, every single one, the students arrive at the understanding that we are interdependent, that no one of us can survive or do this alone. It's impossible. They learn it viscerally, they understand it experientially, and they decide to be compassionate and express compassion. So I'll just finish with a story, a true story of something that happened that expresses how this kind of education can go far beyond the classroom. I was going to Nashville, Tennessee to give a talk at a very wealthy school. I come from blue-collar background, public schools. Picked up at the airport by a gentleman in a nice late model black Lexus. Got it in a nice suit, nice haircut, big gold class ring from his college on his hand. I took one look at him, and in my arrogance, I said, I've got him figured out. Rich kid, probably never worked a day in his life, born with a silver spoon in his mouth. I knew, because I had lived a tough life. We're driving to the school. He's a teacher at the school, been sent to fetch us. And he said, Mr. Hunter, I love that film, that World Peace and Other Fourth Grade Achievements. I said, oh, why is that? My attitude, such smugness. He said, I like it because you have them write that letter. In the World Peace Game, there's a letter. If you wager your little plastic troops in a battle, which you can do in the World Peace Game, and you lose, they're removed from the board. But I thought there had to be some consequences, so you have to write a letter. Fourth graders, fifth graders, it's one paragraph, explaining why you committed your troops to the battle. Write this letter to the parents of the fictional troops of the fictional battle, and explain yourself. So they would say, dear parents, I'm sorry to tell you, we lost your son or your daughter in battle, and here's why it happened, and they sign their name as the leader of the fighting force, of the state leader. They read it, it's a solemn moment, not a big deal. I put it in just to remind them of possible consequences, even though it's a plastic toys on a board game. This gentleman driving, and that's where I get a little bit emotional. He said, I like that you have him write that letter. And I said, why is that? He said, because a year and a half ago, I was a Marine Corps commander before I became a teacher. I did several tours in Afghanistan and Iraq. And he went quiet. I don't know how I found the nerve to ask. I said, so what was that like? And I saw his hands tighten on the stern wheel. He looked straight ahead and he said, it was kinetic. It was a kinetic situation. And then he said, I'd like to have him write that letter because I had to write that letter. I was a casualty officer. I had to write that letter. I had to make that phone call, Mr. Hunter. I had to go to the door and knock on the door of the parents and tell them that their son or daughter had been killed. So, Mr. Hunter, you keep having your students, your children, write that letter. And maybe someday they won't have to write that letter because they'll understand what it means before they get that far in trouble. It's completely wrong. Here's a young man who's seen the worst that humans can do to each other, the absolute worst. And he's telling me, a small-town school teacher, keep teaching, keep letting the children make those decisions and find out what works. You don't have to teach it. You don't have to preach it. So things like the World Peace Game are allowed because we have administrators and philosophers and thinkers who understand that teachers need the room and the space, the trust and support to be able to teach well. I've never been a successful teacher who did not have trusting administration behind them. You cannot do it alone. So that is the results of this World Peace Game is just a gesture of all my teachers and the work they've done. I'm simply trying to carry out the work that they have done. And our children are our only hope, and so we give them the best we have. So thank you, University of Virginia, and thank you all for listening and allowing me to share this with you. Thank you. Extra time. Okay, thank you. This is World Peace and Other fourth grade achievements by Chris Farina in Venable School here in Charlottesville, shot in 2006, and it may have sound as well. Maybe not. I'm a teacher. I can provide a soundtrack if you need one, you know. Is it muted? This girl is now attending Howard University. Excellent. And she's going into political science, I believe. Guys, questions, take your seats in your cabinets. This is the World Peace Game, and it's about 28 years old. It's a political science simulation. It involves usually about 25 to 30 students. And the game basically pits 4 or 5 countries against each other in every way, politically, socially, militarily, and economically. They're pitted against each other, and they have to use their imagination, use their thinking skills to think their way out of these problems that they're pitched into head first. The game starts with them inheriting situations on the verge of chaos and combat, and they've got to think their way out of that situation.
There has to be a way we can use this. We have to figure that out. We can use this volcano, use this eruption to make something good happen.
We have started a counterattack and sending its air force.
Oh God. If you look on the World Peace Game map, he has like that much oil.
So does Caden. And Caden's our complete ally. And we can also get some oil from him.
Okay.
We're not going to.
I say whenever Caden said you would.
Caden, we're not going to attack them? I know. It's a threat. You did say that. All the ships that we moved was for confusion, and it wasn't for battle, and that we come in peace.
First, I gave him 7 days to do something about the microscopic organisms, and he's now 2 days left, and he hasn't even boarded the island and tried to do anything about it, and I think he's trying to attack me instead of trying to do what he said he was going to do.
I want it to be so thrilling that they don't want to do without it, but so challenging that they almost can't do it. And to have the two contrasts, have those two opposite things working together, it's, for me, that kind of tension is what I think is where learning occurs. They have that love and fear, and that learning just torques on that kind of mismatch, I think. And that seems to be what's happening in this game.
It's a game that makes you think really hard. It makes you really think about what's really going on in the world.
What I think is you can't be all about war, and you can't be, again, this may sound bad, but you can't be all about peace.
Yeah, not like all like flowers and grassy fields and
Solar panels and
Last year-
houses.
no, it's not like that. You'll have to have some defense.
It's challenging. There is no right or wrong answer. If you wanted a right answer, choose the one that helps everyone and then think about yourself.
We start off with a reading from Sun Tzu, the Chinese general, his book, The Art of War, which of course, as you know, is basically how to stay out of war. And for the most part, if you're in it, how to get out of it quickly. And he says, therefore, a victorious army first wins and then seeks a battle. A defeated army first battles and then seeks victory. Read that again, yeah.
We've really had enough of people attacking. I mean, we've been lucky. I mean, the time, now I'm feeling really weird because I'm living what Sun Tzu said 1 week. 1 week he said, those who go into battle and win and will want to go back, and those who lose in battle will want to go back and win. And so I've been winning battles, so I'm sort of going into battles. more battles. And I think it's sort of weird to be living what Sun Tzu said.
This session of the World Peace Game is about to commence. Because I have such confidence in you, I'm going to do something I've never done before.
What?
The game has 3 new crises in it. I've never put new crises in once the game has started. These are crises concerning water rights. One of the big problems in the world today is people having enough clean water for whatever they need, drinking and washing and so forth. It's a big problem. And guys, I really think they're going to be almost impossible to get out of. But I really have confidence you're going to be able to do it. I don't know why I think you can. So I would never do this if I didn't think you could. But I don't know how you're going to do it. I cannot imagine. So good luck to you.
I'm sorry, but I'm okay. But I really need to talk to Joe.
Just Connor, then you.
Mr. Hunter, he's a brain stretcher. My brain, when I come from his classroom, it just feels like it's just like empty. If I shake my head around, I can feel it swishing.
My brain, when I come back from his class, it feels like it's just
jelly.
Learned so much.
I hope that they never need me again, that I put myself out of a job, that they have everything that they could possibly have gotten from this experience, from me, from my influence, whatever it might have been, and that they take away every tool, every creative thinking tool, every critical thinking tool they can, and they have a confidence that they can solve any problem, they can deal with anything.
One of the things I learned was that other people matter. In this game, one person can't win, everyone has to win. And I think that taught me a lot about cooperating with other people, being generous, and having an attitude that if you work together, you can achieve anything.
In view of all the crises being solved, and in view of everyone's asset value being over 100 billion, I hereby declare this World Peace Game won!
When I look at things like the game and what happened with these kids, as I said to them today, if just one of you is in position to leverage something good for the world, just one of you is in that kind of position, that can make all the difference. And if you picked up a tool from this game, a thinking tool or critical thinking skill that helps you do that, you may save us all. And that's what I'm naively hoping might happen.
Thank you so much for those 3 phenomenal presentations. I'd like to ask one question that I'd like to ask each of you to briefly respond to, and then I would like to open it up to the audience. So one thing that was striking about all 3 of your presentations was that they each emphasized either civility or compassion and interconnection. And that's a very particular way of thinking about what civic education should aim for. There are many people who would argue, we don't have time, things are too urgent. What civic education should do is teach children what and how the levers of power in government operate, and how to strategically organize themselves to collectively resist injustice through protest, through lawsuits, not through civility and compassion, or at least not as its focal point. So I'm curious how each of you would respond, and perhaps you could respond briefly so then we can open it up.
So at the youth leadership, while we do teach facts, like how many senators we have, et cetera, that's not our goal. We truly believe that those skills of discourse, debate, and compromise breed compassion, and also inspire social justice. So while we do incorporate those basic, like the national standards for civics or something like that, that's kind of our bottom and our starting point. We're really trying to get students to think for themselves and problem solve. There's a board game, constitutional board game, that you can't win unless you compromise. Things like that, because we feel like the problem solving skills that were shown in the film you just saw, those are the things that carry kids through a lifetime. They can always find out the basic facts by looking on their cell phone, right? But we want them to think deeper. So I love the different levels in the peace game, because I think that kind of talks about what we're hoping in our materials for teachers, that we can get teachers to teach beyond that first level and really dig down into what is important about social action and social justice.
You want to go next? All right. So I think that's a great question. A couple of quick thoughts. One is that it's much more difficult now to teach people about how government operates, because I think how government operates is changing more quickly now than it's changed in the last 40 years. The state that I live in, it's certainly operating in a much different way than it did when I first started teaching there in 1999. So I think that the notion that we can teach people how to memorize basic things about how a bill becomes a law, to a certain extent, has always been ridiculous, right? I mean, what textbooks said about how a bill becomes a law and how bills actually become laws have always been very different stories. But I also think that some of our very basic understandings about, for example, the reconciliation process that we're going to be seeing in the next several days, that really looks quite different than it used to. And I do think we need to help people understand what's happening. It just means that we're going to have to do it as it's happening. We're going to have to build the plane while the plane is flying. And I don't think it's a good idea to have people memorize a bunch of facts. But I do think it's a good idea to have really high quality, rigorous instruction on things that are hard to understand. So for example, probably I would argue the single most important thing that's happening politically now is the Supreme Court case on gerrymandering.
Yes, I agree.
It's unbelievably, regardless of what your political views are, it's an unbelievably important case. It's really difficult. We need people to understand that case for a whole bunch of reasons, and they can't understand it by going to their smartphone, because they are not going to have the conceptual background knowledge they need to understand it. So really high quality curriculum, like I can promise you Street Law will be developing if they haven't already developed it, is really going to be necessary. We want people to get that. So, you know, I think we can't ignore the importance of deep political understanding. That being said, I don't think there should be a disjuncture between deep political understanding and engaging in protests and engaging in lawsuits and engaging in ways of trying to get the political system to change. As a matter of fact, everybody I know who does that well does it from a place of deep political understanding. I mean, I have a whole bunch of friends who are lawyers that what they do for a living is sue the government, and they don't do it without knowing stuff. You know, the people who created this challenge to gerrymandering and the mathematicians who are working on creating this exceptionally interesting algorithm, I mean, those folks really know a lot, but they're putting their knowledge to use in a way to get things changed. So those things don't need to be decoupled, they need to be coupled. And finally, it can't be the case that we say, in order to get things changed, it's not a good idea to be civil. I mean, that just makes absolutely no sense. And if people are setting up that kind of binary, I think we need to really push back on it. Doesn't mean that people can't have justified anger. For sure, I don't think there's anything wrong with having anger. I mean, anger is a fabulous motivator, at least it has been in my life. But I do think we have to treat people with civility. And if we don't treat people with civility, then we're not really going to get problems solved. But civility doesn't mean agreement. treating people with civility means you respect them enough that you care enough about what they think that you will disagree with them. And so, you know, there's this concept in the Midwest called Midwestern nice, which is that everyone just kind of lies to one another. And it's enormously irritating. You know, people who move to the Midwest and experience this for the first time really push back on it. And the reason they push back on it is because they see Midwestern nice as being actually a deep lack of respect. And so I think that civility, when done well, is the way we respect people enough to say that we're going to disagree. And we want people to be able to disagree.
Wow. I don't know if I can follow those comments. I will say that I second what Meg said and Diane. Fact-based learning is almost a dinosaur. There's a danger to it. I give talks to high school students and their parents sometimes together. And I start the talk by saying, I really have great sympathy for you high school students. I really feel for you because you have multi-billion-dollar industries that have a mission of only occupying every living second of your day 24/7, so that you do not have time to make meaning of anything on your own. You do not have time to reflect and understand things on your own. It is spoon-fed and given to you. I have my third grade students, I give a writing assignment. I say, we're going to do creative writing today. They get so excited. I say, but there's one stipulation. No monsters, no aliens, no explosions, no one gets hurt, no pets, no fairies. And a little boy stood up and said, well, what are we going to write about then? Because all they were writing about in that generation was Harry Potter and someone else's imagination who'd been paid millions of dollars to create it somewhere else and put it into their mind stream. So they no longer had to imagine or create. So those kind of opportunities taken. When I say that to high school students, I see them looking at their parents going, yeah. I have to be connected 24/7 to survive socially. I have no friends unless I'm connected, unless I'm on screen. We've created a world where our students can't even survive without being plugged in to this informational industrial complex we've created. It's an impossibility for them. So to be able to have a moment to reflect, like after reading Sun Tzu, we stop for 2 moments and we try to digest what he said. I don't call for an answer. We don't have any discussion. We simply sit with it. Try to understand what this wise person is saying to us about how to avoid suffering. And then we proceed with our own understandings in the game. So the first thing we ask our students to do in this regard is to think about, first, fundamentally, who are you? Who are you really? By that I don't mean whether you like Metallica, Beyonce, Drake, or Taylor Swift, or what kind of ice cream you like. No, cutting through all that, going far deeper than that. Who are you really? Beyond your politics, beyond your race, beyond your family origins. Who essentially are you? And that question you can spend a lifetime wrestling with. But the light it sheds is amazing, and it informs everything you can do afterwards because you start there. And then the second step, of course, we talked about earlier in the flowers, is that collective wisdom of having a relationship, of going where people are that may not agree with you and developing a relationship, as you both have said. It's the only way to recognize, to realize, and to affirm the actuality of existence, which is interdependence. We are completely interdependent. Those of us on the far right, those of us on the far left, actually depend upon each other. It's like two sides of a coin, like the yin-yang symbol from the Asian cultures. You cannot have one without the other. But how we are coming to meet in the middle and find some middle ground, some blending, some civility, some way we can live together and really strive for the happiness of everybody. We all just want to be happy. And not just superficially, not just with a nice car, a nice house, but fundamentally happy. And how do we do that? So in the game, we start by looking at ourselves first, rather than reaching for an external solution, an external technique, an external method to ourselves, an external technology to solve our problems for us. We solve them in a way, the old-fashioned way, human, on the human level first.
We have to get away from all or nothing thinking. and all or nothing teaching. I think that's really important. So I think I agree with Diana that gerrymandering is an issue that's really important right now. And we created a gerrymandering simulation, and there are plenty of them online, but we specifically decided to not make it an online thing because we felt like students were losing this communication. So we made it, it's something you do in the classroom. It has nothing to do with online or computer. But you have to communicate with each other in order to figure out the possibilities for solving the gerrymandering question.